Battleships. Who doesn't like Battleships? I love Battleships. I started playing Battleships as my very first class when I downloaded the game all those years ago and began my slippery slope into doing this as a second job now. But Battleships are a very important class. They're a fun class. They're also a class that attracts many a new player. Why? Because, well, they are the massive ships with tons of armor and tons of guns bolted to them and attract quite a few players to them. And the goal of today's video is to help you decide what battleship line to go with next. Be it you're a new player just looking for your next grind, maybe you're new to battleships and you just want to figure out what battleship line would be the best for today's meta, or you're a returning player just trying to see where these lines are at in 2024. That is the goal for the video today. So with that out of the way, if you do find this video helpful, informational, or entertaining, please make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel while you are down there. It helps out, of course, tremendously on the YouTube side of things. So the first question I have to ask is, well, how do you like to play? That is going to determine what nation should be best for you. And I've split these nations up into 3 separate categories. They are a little broadish, but they are generally how these nations do play. And again, we'll get into the details of each nation when we get there. But the 3 categories are brawling battleships, mid-range battleships, and of course, the snipers. So you can check out the timeline down below. The chapters have been set up, and if you have an interest in playing in one of those 3 categories, I would encourage you just to go ahead and get to that section of the video. But we're going to go ahead and start out with the Brawlers, my personal favorite class, or I should say personal favorite playstyle, actually. So the brawling battleships can also be divided into 2 groups. You have your secondary brawlers, then you have your more tanky main gun brawlers. But let's start with the secondary brawlers, which are, of course, the German battleships. You have your mainline German battleships. That is the Preußen line, composed of the Bismarck, FDG, and Preußen at higher tier. And then you have your German battlecruiser line, the Schlieffen line. But we'll start with the main line. So the mainline German battleships have kind of had a rough time in the past couple of years. I would be lying to you if I said the game was overly kind to them here in the past couple of years. But they can still brawl if you really want them to. Are they the best at it between themselves and the battlecruisers? No, but there is enough of a differentiation there for a different playstyle. The mainline German battleships, if you want to play them as secondary brawlers, you have to be more cautious about what it is exactly you are doing in the game, because they don't have the speed or overwhelming secondary fire power that the battle cruisers do. Now, what they do gain over the battle cruisers in terms of secondary performance is that generally tier for tier, the secondary guns on the mainline German battleships will be able to pin the common thresholds at that tier. For example, the Preußen, she has nothing but 128mm and above guns on her deck, which means those 128mm guns and above with the German HE pin ratio can and will pin 32mm of armor, which is of course the last major threshold in the game, and that is great because that gets you good consistent damage from your secondaries without having to build into IFHE, unlike what you gotta do with the German battle cruisers. So it also maintains your fire chance, so you're getting pin damage and you're getting fires, but you do have less guns than the German battle cruisers. However, again, they're doing more damage per shot, so more consistent damage. And the German battleships, the main line, they have more armor, of course, than the battle cruisers, but they are slower. Now, don't get me wrong, these ships are not exactly slow. All of them can get over 30 plus knots once you get past tier 7. Well, actually, tier 7 and above, you can get up and rocking and rolling at 30 plus knots, which is great for trying to, close into secondary range and get your target, chewed on by your secondary gun, which is of course the goal of any secondary brawling ship. And again, the armor is much better. You have that wonderful German turtleback armor, which means you won't be eating citadels at close range, but at longer ranges with plunging fire and some just weird armor geometry, you can and will eat citadels at longer range. And even if you aren't eating citadels at longer range, your armor is just chunky at range, which means those AP shells will bite into your armor and do a pretty large amount of damage to your ship. These ships also, especially from tier 7 on up, do have very large superstructures, so you're going to be eating AP pins, you're going to be eating HE pins. There's tons of property up there for the shells to bite into. You have to keep that in mind. They do also get hydroacoustic search from tier 8 on up, which is great for trying to avoid torpedoes because you don't really have great torpedo protection in these ships. So overall, in today's meta, the mainline brawlers aren't really fantastic, but it's kind of like when they work very well. And if you dedicate yourself to figuring out when to push, when not to push, using island cover to, block the line of sight from the enemy ships and kind of sneak into secondary range as much as you can with the horrible detection range of these ships, they can work, but wouldn't be my main suggestion if you want a secondary brawling line. That would be the German battle cruisers. Now, the battle cruisers are very, very, very good at, just sprinting at the enemy and overwhelming them with secondary firepower. So using the tier 10 as another example point, the Schlieffen, she has a ton of 105mm guns all over her ship, which of course is not enough to pin that 32mm threshold like we were talking about with the Preußen, but if you do spec into IFHE, they can pin 32, and then you're getting good damage, but you have to fire chance. However, the Schlieffen has something like 32, 34 secondary guns per side, which is just dumb. So just through the sheer volume of fire you're going to be getting with these secondary guns, you're going to be setting fires even with IFHE. It's a +2 that you can get the concealment on the Schlieffen down to essentially your secondary gun range. The tier 9, you can do a similar thing as well. I don't think it's exactly the same as the detection range, the secondary range that is, and the Zeton you can't do that, but the Schlieffen you can. And plus you also get torpedoes with the German battle cruisers. Long range, slow 55-knot torpedoes, but when you're doing drive-bys, screaming past the enemy ship at like 38 knots, who cares that they're slow? They're the ace up your sleeve, and they can and will, swing that engagement in your favor. Now, of course, the armor is much less prevalent here with the German battle cruisers. They are not as well armored, their citadel's exposed, and they have less HP, and they have thinner armor than you would expect from a battleship. They have, I believe the Schlieffen has 25mm of armor. She does have a giant icebreaker bow, though, so you can use that to some advantage, but it's still coded in 25, and everyone at tier 8+, of course, wants to pin 32, so you can be pretty darn sure that they can pin you with HE, so you can get farmed down fast. But again, with the good concealment and the good speed, you can dictate the terms of the engagement with the Schlieffen, which is a big plus. You do also get to the hydroacoustic search on the higher tier German battle cruisers as well, and you do also get the fast damage con, which can and will cool down much faster than the normal damage con, but it will of course run out because you get a limited supply of it, and you get one less healed charge than you normally would with the mainline German battleships. So what I recommend here with the secondary brawlers, if you want a real secondary brawling experience, go with the German battle cruisers. They're great. If you want more of that old school German brawling experience, go with the German battleships, the mainline German battleships. But I really do recommend building to the mainline German battleship guns, especially with the Preußen, because it's just a wonderful experience once you get those guns down to like a 22-second reload base with their excellent alpha and pins. So that's the secondary brawlers. Now the tanky brawlers, those are the Soviet battleships, the Kremlin line. And man, these guys, if you get them in the right position, they are just not going to die. They have great armor, especially bow in. They have excellent ballistics in their main battery guns. And well, the Kremlin is just kind of an unkillable rock in a lot of situations. They have the fast damage con, just like the German battle cruisers. Well, in fact, the Soviet battleships had it before the German battle cruisers. So their armor is incredibly thick. So when you're eating HE to the face, you're getting a lot of shatters on these Soviet battleships. When you do have fires getting started on these ships, they have large HP pools and the quick damage cons in order to get that fire, get those instances of flooding out. They do also have pretty good flooding protection up and down the line, especially at higher tier with the Kremlin. The Kremlin is a ship that you just kind of send to the flank that you want to be a thorn in the enemy side, and they really have to sit there and focus it out. Although, of course, in today's World of Warships, with submarines being around, sitting on an island angled bow into the rest of the enemy team isn't exactly ideal. but if there's no subs around, the Kremlin can most certainly do it. She also has pretty good AA, just it doesn't have any health, so it can get wiped out. But yeah, that's kind of the oddity. Up and down the line, the A is kind of okay. But these ships are more about, again, just being that, unsinkable rock with big guns. The Kremlin has 457mm guns, and you get 16-inch guns at Tier 7 with the Sinop, which is kinda nuts. That's insane to have 16-inch guns at Tier 7 because you can just overmatch pretty much everything that you're going to see from your tier down. So enjoy that. But up and down the line, too, they do have weak sides. If you ever catch a Soviet battleship broadside to you, you are probably going to Citadel it. The only exception from that's maybe the Kremlin, because its Citadel is a little lower and it's kind of got this wonky angle to it. But at close range, like 13 kilometers in, you can and will Citadel a Kremlin as long as you have like halfway decent AP. How are these guys doing today's World of Warships? Like I said, the submarines have kind of put a little monkey wrench in their play style. But, I mean, if there is a place where you can stay angled into the enemy team, you can absolutely tank for days. The guns do hurt like hell. They have a special dispersion gimmick where essentially they are slightly more accurate at close range than they are at longer range. That's a very TLDR description of it, but basically you get better dispersion at closer range than you do at longer ranges. So really, ideally, these ships are best played from 15 kilometers in, which is kind of a pain when a lot of matches today don't really get 15 kilometers in until the last like 2 minutes in a lot of instances. But again, when you can get into those positions where you can bow tank and just be a nuisance to the enemy team, they are quite excellent in today's World of Warships, but probably not some of the best performing ships. So now that takes us to the mid-range battleships. So we're going to start out with the American trio. So America very quickly suddenly has 3 whole battleship lines in game. Well, 3 splits. They're not complete lines like the German battle cruisers are. So the good old American battleships, the Montana line, very excellent ships. Colorado's a bit of a slog, I'm not going to lie. New Mexico's another one a lot of players kind of get stuck on, because from the Colorado down, the American battleships are standard dreadnoughts. They're slow, 20 knots. You have decent sized guns for your tier from the New Mexico down. Colorado, you get 16-inch guns at Tier 7, like I was just saying with the Sinop with the Soviet battleships. That's great because you can overmatch the enemy armor at pretty much everything that you're going to see from Tier 7 on down. The Colorado guns are more accurate than you would find them to be at Tier 7, especially considering they are 16-inch guns. But the thing about the Colorado is that at Tier 7, a lot of other battleship lines are unlocking their fast battleships, while the Americans are stuck going 20 knots, so that's kind of a sticking point with the Colorado. But if you continue on to the North Carolina, you have a wonderful ship there, 2.1 Sigma at Tier 8 with the American 16-inch guns. That's great. And the American 16-inch guns, from here on up, they all are equipped with the Mark 8 Super Heavy AP. The Mark 8 Super Heavy AP is an AP shell that, well, is heavy. It's very dense. It is essentially a way to give the 16-inch guns of the American battleships more alpha, and they hit incredibly hard. So they really hit like 17 or dare I say even 18-inch guns, but of course they can't overmatch what a real 17-inch or an 18-inch gun can. Another trade-off for that weight is the fact that they do fly through the air insanely slowly. They have a terrible air drag coefficient. It's like a 2 business day shipping, but man, when they get there, if you aim properly, they are going to most certainly do what they need to do, which is why they are mid-range ships. They're best played from about 16-ish kilometers in. I really wouldn't be trying to play these ships at like 17 kilometers plus. You're just going to have a bad time. Any of these ships, the battle ships, the mainline ships, or the hybrid ships. But yeah, 17 kilometers in, that's their sweet zone. Just because you can shoot at 24 kilometers does that mean you should shoot at 24 kilometers. Trust me, anything with a brain is going to see those shells coming and have plenty of time to turn their engines on and get out of the way. But anyway, yes, the main line, best played at 17 kilometers in. Yeah, North Carolina, great. Just be wary that she has essentially no side armor. So yeah, with the continuing addition of larger caliber guns at tier 8 on up, so like all the 18-inch guns or the super ships. Well, North Carolina thankfully doesn't have to deal with super ships, thank God. But yeah, all the 18-inch plus guns we now have at tier 10, they just love seeing a broadside North Carolina. Iowa's great, incredibly fast ship, great AA. You get the 50 caliber guns instead of the 45 caliber guns of the North Carolina. So the velocity, instead of being 702 meters a second, it's, I believe, 740, 750 meters a second. So a much more comfortable velocity, but still, again, terrible air drag with those AP shells. Montana bolts another turn on an Iowa, loses some speed because of that, and of course, because it's 12 16-inch guns at tier 10, the accuracy isn't quite as good as the Iowa per turret, but when you can get your broadside on target with the Montana, it is quite good. The American mainline battleships from tier 8 to tier 10 also get the improved American battleship heal and the improved American battleship damage con that runs for 20 seconds instead of like 10, 12 seconds like most other battleships damage cons do. So that gives you the ability to kind of push your way through fires and floods and adds another level of survivability to the American battleships that most of the other mainline battleships don't get in this game. And couple that again with the American improved heal, and that is a winning combination there. So I would highly recommend the American mainline battleships. They're an excellent starting line. They're very forgiving because of that heal and damage con, and they will teach you the basics of aiming and positioning and angling, because while they do have good armor, it's not that great, and you can and still will eat large damage if you do slip up and show your side to the enemy ships. So, speaking of American battleships, next one is the Battleship line, the Vermont line, the big boys. Yeah, these ships used to be snipers, but then Wargaming retooled them to be more of mid-range ships. This is like a what-if line. What if the Americans continued with the standard dreadnought style of battleships instead of going with the fast battleships that we did get? And, well, they're pretty good. Now, the line is kind of, the Kansas and the Minnesota are like, okay-ish, but man, the Vermont's just an absolute powerhouse. 12 18-inch guns, 457mm guns, though not 460mm guns, so you can't you can't overmatch 32mm of armor with the 457s of the Vermont, but you can overmatch 30, which means this thing is just like a sledgehammer to cruisers. You catch a cruiser, I mean, my God, they're going to perish if you hit, which you probably will, because you can take the Special American Plotting Room Mod 2 module that you can also take on the main line. This gives you an additional 11% buff to your dispersion, and when you have 12 18-inch guns like you get on the Vermont, that's some serious firepower going exactly where you want it. Now, of course, the downside to the Vermont is that you do get a 40-second reload with those 12 18-inch guns, so it is a little miserable to play, but hey, you gotta pay to use the sledgehammer, right? And it works out quite well. Now, the Vermont, Minnesota, and Kansas are also very, very chunky and huge, and they're easy targets to farm down. But again, you do get the American improved battleship heal to kind of offset that, and the improved American damage con as well, so they can make their health go a long ways. The Vermont and the Minnesota and Kansas as well, they have an improved acceleration, deceleration. So, like, you can get up and move pretty fast, but you're still only going 20 knots at the end of the day, 22 with the speed flag. So you definitely have to be aware of your surroundings, be paying attention to the battlefield, and know when to move and where to move to. You gotta be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead when you're as slow as these guys are. Their shells were retooled to be more suitable at medium range. Don't even bother really shooting at 18 kilometers plus unless you have a really good shot, like they're not paying attention, they're not looking your way, you have perfectly flat broadside, because the pins really drop off past 18, 19 kilometers, and again, by the time they get there, they're probably going to have, fallen on their A or D key by mistake, right, before your shells get there. So again, 17 kilometers in is really where you want to be playing the Battleship line. The hybrid line, the Louisiana line, where they massacred my state, they perform very similar to the mid-range ships. They are mid-range ships to the main line. You just have some very wonky turret setups They share the main guns of the main line, except with the Louisiana, you have this weird quad turret in the back. But again, they perform exactly the same as the Iowa and Montana guns do. You just have a flight deck bolted to your ship. Does this mean I sit in the back of the map and play these ships? No. You are a battleship with a flight deck, not a carrier with some guns. You still got to be playing these ships at mid-range because the shells, like I said, they take forever to get where they're going, and trying to play this at 20 kilometers plus is going to be miserable. So, of course, you get the flight deck with the dive bombers. Dive bombers are a source of good, consistent damage. However, you do have the flight deck bolted to your back, which is just begging to get shot with HE, SAP, and AP. So you have to be very aware of that flight deck. Of course, this means you kind of have to, I don't want to say hide, be cautious of where you're at, and be cautious of when you get spotted. I'm not saying don't fire ever, just, make sure your shots count. I would definitely play these things last out of these three lines here, because you do have to be very comfortable with the American guns, and again, be very aware of your positioning and such, and also have some type of skill with playing aircraft with CV. So I would save these guys to last with grinding through the American line. I would go main line, battleship line, and then hybrid line here with the American battleships. All right, some British battleships, British BBs, the main line. We just talked about the Conqueror in yesterday's video. Very good line, in my opinion. The downsides of this line are like the Monarch and the Lion. Again, I never had problems with Monarch. People say, well, what I most commonly hear players say is that the Monarch, the HE, isn't that much of an upgrade over the King George's. It's not. But you get 9 guns with a quick reload. It's still British BB HE. The British BBs have an improved HE shell where you have a high alpha rating and a high fire rating per shell, which means you start fires left, right, and center. You have also an improved heal, a massively improved heal from tier 9 on up. It's a super heal. So, you're starting fires, you got a super heal. You can essentially print back 2/3 of your ship with a Conqueror super heal, which is absolutely ridiculous. But that's what you get for having 32 millimeters of armor and lower HP at each tier than the rest of your, same tier battleships. So in addition to the improved HE, you also get the short fuse AP, which has a fuse time of 0.015 seconds instead of 0.33 seconds, like most other AP shells in the game. So when it comes to dealing with cruisers, it will more than likely explode inside the cruiser rather than overpinning the cruiser like so many other AP shells will do. So that's great for dealing with cruisers and battleship extremities and aircraft carriers as well. Those are pretty thinly armored. But when you have the short fuse AP, you're going to be pinning the living crap out of them. These ships do also generally, especially at higher tier, have lower concealment ratings than their same tier counterparts. Conqueror, like we talked in yesterday's video, has 12.3 kilometers concealment, which is absolutely absurd for a giant tier 10 battleship like the Conqueror is. So that's great. So essentially you use them to sneak around, get into a good position, farm stuff down with your HE, blap cruise out of the water with your AP. Don't be afraid to use your AP. You are a terrible British battleship player if you never use your AP. Make sure you use it. It's great. Utilize it. I mean, you don't get any other consumables or anything. No spotter, no hydro. So, yeah, make sure you're swapping back and forth between the AP and HE, especially on Conqueror. All right, and that also takes us down to the British battle cruisers. They did something pretty interesting here, both with the British battle cruiser line and the German battle cruiser line, where they maintained a lot of that, a lot of the features and characteristics of the main line and the battle cruiser line. Battle cruisers, again, short fuse AP, British HE, still got those guns. The difference is the St. Vincent at higher tier, at tier 10, has 18-inch guns, those 457s, which is great, because now you have 457 HE Alpha, 457 Fire Chance, and AP Alpha, which is great. The downsides, of course, they have even thinner armor than the British battleships do. They, of course, have battle cruiser armor, so again, 25mm plating instead of 32mm plating on the bow and on the nose. So you're going to get overmatched by a hell of a lot more at your tiers. And again, this is a trend up and down the line. They have thinner than average extremity armor at their tier. So again, you're going to get pinned a lot more. But on the upside, you get a faster ship, you get an engine boost, so you are absolutely zipping around the battlefield with that engine boost and using your larger caliber guns to, rain AP down upon your enemies, and if they're angled, burn them down with the HE. Again, generally the way you want to play these battle cruisers, be running around the back. You don't ever want to sit there and stop and tank because you can't tank. Use speed to your advantage, be a maneuverable target, a hard target to hit. And you do also get your nuclear torpedoes. Are they actually nuclear powered, or do they actually have nuclear warheads? No, but they have high damage alpha, again, usually going up and down the line. They also, when you get to higher tier, you have the hull-mounted torpedoes. Well, up and down the line, too. They are the hull-mounted torpedoes, so you can launch them one at a time, and they generally have, again, a higher alpha. And then you get to, like, the Conqueror, the St. Vincent, where you have, like, a 30k alpha torpedo, but you only get 2 of them in your nose. So that's kind of nutty and fun. The British battlecruiser line, up and down the line, I thought the line was exceptionally well. The Hawk is probably the biggest highlight for me, because that thing's just downright goofy at its tier. But yes, I would recommend both of these lines for today's World of Warships. They're both very good meta lines. British battleships, they have I don't want to say the same problem as the American battleships, but their shells are floaty as well. So you do want to play both of these ships, of course, at mid-range. 17 kilometers in, you get the best performance out of the shells and the best performance out of these ships. That takes us to our Italian fellows with the Italian battleships. This is a terrible line to grind. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Mid-tier just sucks because these ships have sap shells. Sap shells are essentially HE shells that, they don't penetrate into the armor. They have a short fuse time, but have high alpha. So you won't be citadeling much unless it's like a extremely weakly armored light cruiser with the sap shells, but that doesn't matter because you're going to be pinning them enough to do alpha damage, do huge chunks of alpha damage to your enemy ships. And that is great on paper, but the problem in game with that is that in order to balance that, the guns can't really be that accurate, especially at mid-tier where you have a ton of lightly armored ships, because it's mid-tier, right? It's tier 5. What cruiser isn't made out of explodium at tier 5, right? So you can't have these guns be accurate or have a short reload time, because they would, of course, just dominate everything. So because of that, the line's really a slog until you get to the Lepanto at tier 9, and then you're kind of making up for your lack of accuracy with volume of fire. They have been getting buffs throughout the last couple of years where they've been trimming down the reload time and improving the Sigma and improving the dispersion slightly. So they are more comfortable to grind through today than when I went through them upon their release. So there is that. They do also get the smoke generator, the exhaust smoke generator, which you can pop and keep going full tilt. That smoke screen will cover you, so that does help you disengage from an unfavorable engagement or engage by sneaking into somebody's detection range it's by sneaking into your detection range without being spotted by another player. So that is very useful indeed. The Colombo is also a pretty good ship. I do like it. She also got a buff here recently to her dispersion, and she has 16 15-inch guns with sap, which is very, very nice. The tier 8 to 10 ships have very good armor from a bow-in approach, and the Colombo's guns, the rear turrets do 360, which is great, which means you can keep your pointed toward the enemy team and just kind of wiggle around to get those rear guns on target, and you don't have to worry about them, time to take the long way around if you need to swap from one side of your ship to the other side. But I would definitely leave these guys for one of my later grinds. I would not worry about getting these guys, especially in today's meta, because of the inaccurate nature of their guns. You do have to play them more at the mid range than the long range, right? So these are definitely 15 kilometer in ships. And again, with today's meta being mostly a long range meta, you want to kind of pump the brakes on grinding these guys out. But the Baguette fellows are next with the French battleships. So the French battleships are definitely mid-range ships, and they are flankers too. You get an engine boost with the line. You get the French AP, which is the high-velocity AP shell that can and will bite into heavily armed targets and make them cry. But because of that, they also overpin lightly armored targets like it's nobody's business, and they can even overpin some heavily armored targets from close range because of that. Up and down the line, quad turrets are going to be your thing, which look very weird, and there's the turret configurations all over the place. You'll get the Leon with a ridiculous number of guns. You get 36 guns with the Leon if you get a Leon train going on, which is the triple Leon division, which is just kind of goofy. And then you get to the Richelieu with the 2 guns in front of the superstructure. And then you get to the Alsace with the standard turret layout. And then you get to the Republic with the big Raffspiel layout with a turret in front, turret in back, which is okay. Weird, but I'm here for it. The Republic is definitely worth the grind in and of herself. She gets 8 of these, I think they're like 17.5-inch guns or 17.2-inch guns, some weird number, right? Because French. But because of the high velocity of the guns, they do hit hard as hell. And you can get a quick load time too on the Republic if you take the reload module, which I would suggest. So you're sending these 8 shells, every 20 seconds with the Republic, which is absurd. You get 30mm overmatch, which is what you need to punish higher tier cruisers. You could build the Republic and the Alsace for secondaries. I really wouldn't recommend it because the secondaries don't have that much armor and they don't have that much pin either. I just go main gun on both of those ships. The Alsace is probably my favorite in the line. It has 12 15-inch guns at tier 9. And again, with a reload build on it, it does definitely get the job done. But again, these ships, find a flank where the enemy isn't paying attention, pop that speed boost, use your AP to blap the broadsides of enemy ships. The ships are also pretty good HE spammers. I mean, you're going to have to do that because they do have smaller than average guns for their tier until you get to the Republic. But again, with the high number of guns that they have, the HE will definitely get you through what it needs to get you through there. And I do like these ships, but because of the inaccurate nature of the guns and the frustration of having smaller guns up and down the line, I would probably wait to grind these until you get through like the Americans and the British and the Japanese battleships. Those are the top 3 I usually recommend players to go through. After that, if you want some nice quick flankers, I would recommend the French. So our last category is the snipers, and there are 2 lines occupying this, which should come as no surprise to anybody that's played the game. That is the Japanese battleships and the Japanese battlecruisers. Japanese battleships are still some absolutely fantastic ships in the game today. The Yamato is still probably one of the best battleships in the game. It's my highest played battleship, believe it or not. It is just a wonderful ship. Now the grind to get there is also, it's pretty decent. The Izumo, which is the tier 9, which used to be one of the worst ships to grind in the game, has gotten quite a few buffs, so she's a much more enjoyable ship to play in today's World of Warships. But all of these ships, you'll find yourself playing them toward the rear of the pack, because they either have one or 2 things going for them. They either have a high number of typical caliber guns for their tier, or they have a low number of high caliber guns for their tier. Which means, again, you can overmatch the armor of your same tier counterparts and down. Again, like the Yami. 9 guns by tier 10, and a whole lot. 9 18.1-inch, 460mm guns that can overmatch 32mm of armor. Now we're talking, right? So, yeah. You typically play them at the back. Their ballistics are pretty comfortable, but you do have to contend with the very annoying Japanese battleship dispersion pattern. While ships like the American battleships have a nice oval dispersion pattern, the Japanese dispersion pattern is more like a 5-pointed star, a really random 5-pointed star. So even though the Yami has 2.1 sigma, it just it's just aggravating at times with the way that the dispersion sometimes does play out. Now, of course, you can take the accuracy module. You can also grind up to the Yami's legendary module, which is one of the few legendary modules that I fully endorse in this game, to give you an additional buff to your dispersion. So that's pretty good. Their armor up and down the line isn't fantastic, because what's really weird is that the battleship line, the main line, has a weird mix of battleships and battle cruisers, but not like battle cruisers like we think of in today's World of Warships. Like, yes, they're battle cruisers like in real life, but they don't have, the thinner armor and the higher top speed. They do, of course, have like higher top speed, but I mean, they don't get like an engine boost or like an abnormally high top speed, but they still have, thin armor on like their citadel and such. So it's this weird mix of battle cruisers and battleships, right? But when you get to the higher tier ones like the Amagi, the Izumo, and the Yami, they are, of course, much more well armored. And Yami is, of course, a super dreadnought, essentially. But you do have to be looking out for the very wonky geometry of the Yami Citadel. It's got this weird octagonal citadel, which is great at longer ranges. You won't really eat Citadel pins, but at closer ranges, you will be eating Citadel pins through your cheeks, both your bow cheek and your stern cheek. Bow cheek's located just in between turret 1 and turret 2. Stern cheek just below turret number 3, which means that at closer range, ships with good enough AP, even though you're angled, they can go right through that armor and get your citadel. So again, definitely a ship you want to play at longer-ish range. Typically, I will play my Yami at like 20 kilometers plus for the first, well, not 20 kilometers plus, like 20 kilometers to 18 kilometers for the first, few minutes of the game, and then I'll go ahead and push in as the match develops. Because at that point, half the enemy team's dead. You're rolling in with a Yami that should be at, pretty much darn near full health in the later stages of the game. That is definitely enough firepower to turn the tide. Now, the Japanese battle cruisers with the and I just forgot the name of the tier 10 Japanese battle cruiser. That is just downright tragic. The Bungo, there it is, Bungo Straits. I was trying to remember that was from the freaking black and white submarine movie. But anyway, yeah, the Bungo line, they're pretty good. They're kind of weird though because they're battle cruisers, but they're not very fast. But yeah, 30 knot top speed. It's not very fast for a battle cruiser, but who cares? But they are great. They have a large number of guns. The Bungo has 10 18-inch guns. They are, again, 457s. But, man, can this thing absolutely dunk on some enemy cruisers. It's glorious. They have a fast reload time, too. The AP is a little wonky. They have terrible pin at range, but it's fine enough to deal with cruisers. Not exactly fine enough to deal with battleships, to the point to where you're probably firing HE at battleships at longer range, then swap over to AP at cruisers. So the reverse of what a lot of battleships do. But yeah, it's weird like that. But at closer ranges, so like, again, later stages of the game when you have to push up and get into the action, it is serviceable, of course. But of course, too, you do have the thinner armor, so you can get farmed down incredibly easy with the Bungo line. The tier 8's kind of miserable, not going to lie. Tier 9's okay, Bungo's great. And as far as snipers go, either line, I would say, would be a fine choice if you want to snipe. I would probably recommend the Yami line, though, because, again, with the Yami, you get the 32mm overmatch, which is great when dealing with, again, same-tier battleships, and you don't really have to care about their armor. You just got to hit them somewhere, and you're more than likely going to pin their armor layout, so, yeah. Definitely recommend either of these lines. Again, do the Yami first, then the Battle Cruiser line. So guys, that is a 40-minute video. Good lord. Quick overview of each of these lines. I have videos on most of these lines up on the channel and most of these individual ships. So if you are interested in that, please check that out. I'll see if I can attach a playlist or some links in the description or in a pinned comment down below if you want to get an in-depth look at any of these ships, I should say. But anyway, guys, hope you guys have a wonderful Wednesday, a wonderful rest of your week, and hope to catch you guys in the next one.